Is this microphone on? Great, fantastic. Mr. Podesta, can you hear us?
I can. I was having a little trouble getting in, but I'm here now.
That's okay. We really appreciate your time. I'm just going to give a small introduction and we'll get into the questions. This is a fireside chat scenario, but we're in a Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission facility, so we can't set the fire, only metaphorically in terms of, in terms of ideas. So we really appreciate your time. Ladies and gentlemen, John Podesta is the senior advisor to President Biden for international climate policy at the White House. He initially joined the White House in September 2022 as the senior advisor to President Biden for clean energy innovation and implementation to lead the rollout of clean energy provisions under the Inflation Reduction Act, which we just discussed. John manages both an international and domestic portfolio through his new role from the White House. He works in coordination with the strong team Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Office at the State Department and at the National Security Council to represent the U.S. as a fierce champion of bold climate action, as well as continuing to oversee the team implementing the Inflation Reduction Act. In this role, John engages with international, domestic, and private sector partners to harness the clean energy transition to create more prosperous, equitable, and resilient communities across the world. A Chicago native, Mr. Podesta is a graduate of Knox College and the Georgetown University Law Center, where he is currently a visiting professor of law. Mr. Podesta is also a colleague, and both of us have a colleague and good friend of ours who was one of our original attendees here at the conference who couldn't be here today, Mr. Brian Katulis, who we really value, and we really value his opinion, and we wish Brian and his family well. So Mr. Podesta, if we can just jump right into it, so this is our second day of our conference. The goal of our conference is, I think it's kind of unusual in that this is not an energy conference, it's not a climate conference, it's intended to be a dialogue between energy and climate experts to sort of sit on the dais, on stage, and have an active debate, or what we call a dialogue, and to kind of have it out on stage, and to the idea being at the end of that conversation there's sort of a yield. So this is all taking place though in a context, and this gets me to my first question. In my hometown of Oil City, which is just south of Drakewell, where we are today, a once thriving city with streetcars, department stores, and office buildings, is now knocking them down while struggling to save a historic few. The Biden administration has focused considerable attention on communities transitioning from coal. What about those transitioning from oil or other fossil fuels? Specifically, what's the best way for transitioning communities like ours to attract back a thriving private sector as part of the energy transition?
Great. Well, thanks Andrew, for having me. And Brian's told me a lot about this conference, so I'm glad you noted him and mentioned his name. And I appreciate the fact that you've helped organize this in a place that needs to be thinking about what its future economic development looks like. Look, I think from day one, the President and Vice President took on the task of trying to transition our economy from one that was based on fossil fuels to based on clean energy. That was the whole genesis of the Inflation Reduction Act. But in doing so, they also thought about the places that have powered America for literally more than 100 years. Drakewell, I think, goes back to 1850s. My memory serves me, or if my facts are right. And use and production of fossil fuels, as I said, has been the way that the America industrialized, provided a strong pattern of growth. But we're in now a moment where we have to take the climate crisis seriously. We just saw the effects of Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene in the southeast of the United States. We're seeing extreme weather all across the world. And so we're in the throes of trying to find new sources of energy. And that's why the President and Vice President have as I noted, from day one, tried to create the incentives for the private sector really to invest in clean energy, clean tools. And in doing that, I think they also took on board that we wanted to ensure that those communities that had been the backbone of powering America were not left behind. And the result of that is the structure of the bill both provides incentives to locate new industry and new economic development in traditional energy communities. You mentioned coal and coal-fired power plants. We do from the beginning have created a task force in the federal family to ensure that we're paying attention to those communities that are in transition, but it applies to oil communities as well. And the jurisdictions around Oil City, for example, are covered by that 10% bonus credit that applies to traditional energy communities. What that's meant really is that we've seen really a boom in private sector investment in the country, more than $430 billion worth of investment in clean energy supply chains, clean energy deployment around the country since President Biden took office. But the levels of investment in traditional energy communities is twice what it was before the Inflation Reduction Act passed, according to analysis by the Treasury Department. So we think it's working both on the private sector side, but there's also the intent to try to ensure that communities receive the resources they need to be able to transition to cleaner, strong growth models. So I can go through some specifics in Western Pennsylvania, but I think the big picture is we're trying to ensure that, again, that investment is boosted, particularly in those traditional energy communities.
Okay, fantastic. So sort of along those lines, so what do you think needs to be improved upon or expanded, both in terms of scope as well as funding, and whether that could be applied to Pennsylvania or more generally?
Yeah, well look, I think what we're trying to do, for example, I think one of the great promises in Pennsylvania is through the bipartisan infrastructure law, both in Western and in Eastern Pennsylvania, they're recipients of very large grants for the creation of clean hydrogen, the so-called Hydrogen Hub program. And there was significant interest in using hydrogen for a variety of sources, for creating sustainable aviation fuel, for sources of clean transportation, for the production of fertilizer, etc. And Pennsylvania stands to be really at the forefront of that with, as I said, a hydrogen hub that it shares between Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and one in the eastern part of the state where, in combination with Delaware and New Jersey, where these new industries are really coming to life. And I think that's an exciting possibility. So the potential to create real investment, real growth opportunities, put people to work is there for sure. We're also doing things like, as I noted, there are grants that are going out a little further from where you are in Sharpsburg. There was a raised grant of $25 million from the Department of Transportation, which is in a community that had kind of fallen on hard times, was sitting next to brownfields that will clean up that community, bring life back to the downtown. And then the investments, as I said, are having effect across, I think, particularly across the industrial Midwest. Vitro Architectural Glass, which is in Concorton, Pennsylvania, is making glass to supply to First Solar, which saw an enormous growth in its business. That's an Ohio-based company, but glass made in Pennsylvania is being provided to that company, which is producing domestically rather than having panels come from Southeast Asia or that from China. It's domestically produced solar panels. So we're excited about the possibilities. I think what we need to do is take advantage of the fact that these provisions are in law and for the most part available for 10 years. So the private sector ability to plan, invest, and make progress is really there. And I think the people in communities like Titusville, like Oil City, etc., need to think about that as they're trying to develop plans for how they want their community to develop and what kind of businesses they can attract. But that bonus kicker is a very profound, has had a very profound effect on where that money is going. And by the way, that's the first time I think, I've been in government and around for a long time, the first time where there's really been consideration that's gone into both ensuring that the jobs that were being created were high-paying, high-skilled jobs by giving a 5x bonus for paying prevailing wage, using certified apprentices, and a 10% bonus for citing them in disadvantaged communities and energy communities. So I think it's very conscious to try to make sure the work is going and the investment is going to places that I think have felt to some extent left out and left behind by past policy.
Great. So let's just zoom out and then zoom back in. Your predecessor, John Kerry, was quite public about the need to work with China on climate policy. Do you still think there is an ability to work with China, all the while Washington is at loggerheads with Beijing over trade and clean energy and more generally?
Yeah, I think the president and President Xi, during their meetings, their most recent one in Woodside, California, have said we need to keep a dialogue open on climate change. We're the two largest economies, and China is now by far the largest emitter in the world. Almost 30% of emissions are coming from China. So we need to keep trying to work and find a lane of collaboration where we can, but it's in a period of high intense competition because of overcapacity issues, particularly in the green technologies in China. So there's a lot of friction, but we've tried to maintain at least a working relationship, both at the bilateral and multilateral level. To give you a concrete example, the Conference of Parties, the so-called COP29 is coming up, where the world's leaders gather to deal with climate change. And we're co-hosting with Azerbaijan and China a summit on non-CO2 gases, things like nitrous oxide, methane, and ground level ozone, hydrofluorocarbons. Those don't get as much attention, but they account for fully half of the global warming that we're seeing today. So we're trying to work together to get countries to take those gases seriously and reduce emissions from those sectors. And we'll continue to have that dialogue, but it's different. I was around for work for President Obama, and that was a period of a little bit more collaboration. But I think right now we're in a period of high competition, but we still need to keep that open dialogue.
Great. And so my final question for you, we're cognizant of your time. So we're zooming back into this conference. So for the past 3 years, and I've had a conversation with your staff about this conference has worked with Azerbaijanis who are about to host you in Baku for COP29. They are very gracious hosts. I'm sure I think you were recently there and probably experienced it. And even brought us a chef from Baku who made roast lamb, which was incredible, and I think really made things lead to new levels. How can small conferences like ours plug into the large meetings like COP29, where global decisions on climate policy are made? What's the best way for us to get our conclusions to the people making the big decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question, interesting. As you know, Andrew, I just came back from Azerbaijan. There was a pre-COP meeting trying to make some progress before the meeting that starts on November 11th, right after our election. And we were looking at a host of issues about how we move forward from a very successful COP that occurred in the UAE last year, COP28, but Azerbaijan is a major oil and gas producer. That's the source of their wealth. But they've made a decision both to try to reduce their emissions from the sector by reducing methane, but also to create a new industry, much like we're talking about, and create a green corridor between Central Asia and Europe by building out renewable resources, both wind and solar, and creating the transmission and the connections as they have now with natural gas, they can do in the future with green electricity, going both east and west across the Caspian Sea and back towards Europe. So I think it's, in some ways, although it's halfway around the world, same task to try to create a new growth model for the country. We have, I met with the president, raised some issues around their human rights record there, but in general, we're cooperating quite closely, specifically to the point of what recommendations are coming from conferences and small gatherings like this. I think it's important that the role of civil society, of experts be heard in the COP. And one of the things that I talked to President Aliyev about was to make sure that Azerbaijan has a place where people can voice their concerns. But I think in terms of specific outcomes from the conference, send it my way. You've got my email. If you've got ideas for us about what we should be doing, time frames, how we accelerate cooperation, how we build a more healthy planet, how we deal with, like I said, the effects of extreme weather which are going on around the world. We're all ears, and I'm an open door, so just let me know what you think we should be doing.
Well, I'm going to definitely take you up on that offer, Mr. Podesta. We're going to be hearing. We're going to actually be hearing from Elnor Sultanov, the CEO of COP29 Azerbaijan, here in a little bit. But we're really appreciative of your time. Thank you so much. I would just like to personally invite.
We're hopeful that SOCAR, their state oil company, will make some further announcements about what they're doing to reduce methane leaks from in their industrial sector. So maybe they'll give you some insight into that.
Well, that's I wish you the best of luck. We would really also love to invite you up here sometime, either in your current capacity or after you are in another capacity. It's a beautiful part of the country, and I'm sure if you came up here with Brian, you would have a great time. So, ladies and gentlemen, please thank Mr. John Podesta. Yes, don't worry, you'll get the train ride next time. We'll guarantee it. Thanks so much. Okay, bye-bye.